Welcome to another week of GM Tips. GM Rick here, and just coming back at you. Boy, I tell you, last week was a learning experience, but a good experience on my knowledge in the game. And one of the things I'll say as a GM, there are those of you as a GM and DM that will automatically memorize things with no problem at all in the world. And I'm grateful for you folks. You guys are tremendously wonderful people that can, and I think it's great that you do. For me, I'm not a memorizer. I memorize certain factoids, but there's so much with my work and everything else that I got to put into this brain that it's amazing. You think we're only using a small capacity of it, but there's so much I need to learn when it comes to spells and just spell duration and effects. Now, one of the things we have figured out in our game, and I'm going to go through some great tips on things that I'm learning. Number one, your player's spells. And this is why it's so crucial to get a copy of their character sheets with their spells. You may not be an expert on every spell under the sun, but the spells that your PCs have in the game and the spells that your NPCs are using, those are spells that either you should print off a copy of the spell, not a bad idea, or try to at least do a better understanding and dive into it and make your own notes. Here's the reason why I say that. Because you're going to come into a situation ultimately, and your players may remember or forget. Like, for instance, spiritual weapon is one that our players tend to forget at tremendous levels. And so, sorry, I'm going to do this a little bit more so you can hear me a little better. Tremendous levels of understanding with it. And for us, spiritual weapon, you think, wow, okay, that's pretty straightforward. They get as many attacks as your character gets attacks in a round with those swords. They're like a sword version of you. They only, however, do 1d8 plus the bonuses up to a certain level for the sword. Here's the big thing with that, and this is the key thing. Did you know that if you have to reposition one of those swords, so say you slay an enemy with one, and you're moving to the next enemy, that counts as your move action. So you can only reposition the amount of spiritual weapons that you can take 2 move actions for, which is 2 a round. Yes, Bug? You don't know? So that's one of the things that a lot of people don't know. So what's going on in the game is they're wanting to cast and bring in a new spiritual weapon. You want to bring in as many as you can bring in. The problem is with it, you can only move 2 and reposition 2 around. So as long as you've got an enemy with lots of hit points, no problem. Keep throwing the spiritual weapons out. There's not necessarily a limit for how many you can fire off in a combat situation. You just got to keep track of how many rounds have they been up, and I can move only 2 in my turn at any time. I can't reposition 4, 6, 8, 10, and if I reposition them, they only get 1 attack. It's like a move for a regular character and an attack. They don't get the full round of action. So you've got to keep track of those kind of things as a DM. It's a simple spell, right? It's a 2nd level clerical spell. You think, that's pretty straightforward. But the mechanics that goes into spells, I think, is one of the most difficult mechanics for any GM or DM to understand in a game. Why? Because there are so many of them. So, how many spells are there for a system? Hundreds. And yet you're expected as a GM and a DM to know them all. Now, you want to talk about a tough situation. Now, again, I will say this back to players and to those master GMs and DMs. I think you're putting a huge burden on young GMs and DMs, expecting them, and even experienced ones, to expect them to memorize every spell and effect possible in a game. It's horse manure. Unless you've got a photographic memory, or you have some way of filing those things away that you can easily access them in your brain, you're tooling through books, and that's what takes up a combat. Is it up to your players to know them? Yes. Do your players not often know them? Yes. Do your players take advantage and try to cheat the situation? Sometimes, yes. So now the GM can't totally trust the player. So now you're asking a huge burden. So I bring this up for a reason, because let's take a look at some spells. I'm going to pull some stuff out my wazoo as some spells. So bear with me. I'm going to grab the core rulebook and the advanced player's guide here while we're doing this little deal here. So I'm going to grab this. Let's do this. Let's do this one. I'm going to pick a different one. Let's do Ultimate Magic for kicks and giggles. So I got two of my books. I got Ultimate Magic, which is the blue one. Yes, I cover my books, try to keep the covers nice. So Ultimate Magic, let's show you the inside of the cover so you at least know what the face cover looks like. I love that Paizo does this. So it's the one with our epic wizardess on it. So let's look at some spells that are common spells and see how many of them you guys can just tell me off the top of your head. Now, you can do these for the D&D version of them, or you can do them for the version I'm doing with Pathfinder. So, Mastering Magic, okay? There's all kinds of spells that you got to look at when you're looking at these things. So let's go to 194 as the spells, okay? So they got a couple new spells in there, so I'm just going to pick some ones for kicks and giggles. Let's take a look at Allegro, okay? Allegro is a bard spell. How many of you guys know what Allegro is? Anybody? Hands up? No? All right. It's a standard action. Those are things you got to know if you're playing Pathfinder. Now, D&D may be more simplified in that. 3.5 wasn't it? It was kind of the same way. How long does it take you to cast? Standard action, basically, you get a standard action and a move action in any turn. For those that are new to GM. For those that know it, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. So it takes a standard action. It's a verbal. Makes sense. Bard, right? Verbal component. And then it lasts one round of level or till it's discharged. See, there's your either or rules. How many of you guys memorized that and knew that off the top of your head? Anybody? All right. So this spell allows you to act more swiftly while maintaining a bardic performance. You may already be maintaining a bardic performance before you can cast Allegro. So there's something you need to know. You could already be doing your bardic performance, and then you cast la 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 Allegro, and then off it goes. Right? You guys gotta love when I do these things. So then you gain the benefits of the spell Haste as long as you maintain the bardic performance. So now you're hasted. How long does a haste, and what does a haste do for you? One, it gives you extra move foot. Plus 30. And it gives you an extra attack action. But you can't use both. If you're doing full round actions. It's stuff you got to remember, right? It's stuff you have to remember. How many knew that? Okay, let me pull another spell. I'm going to play with you guys a little bit here. Greater Contagion, because I know they have Contagion in D&D. So we're going to play this little game, all right? Greater Contagion. Does anybody know who can cast it? What schools? Does anybody know the casting time? Is it a round, a full round, several rounds, or standard action? What kind of components? Verbal here, somatic here, moves, and then there's the other material ones, which is M. What's the range of it? Anybody? How about who it can affect? What kind of saving throws do you need? Con save, wisdom save, charisma save. Or, con, wisdom, dex. Or, fort, reflex. Yeah, see, we're going into the Pathfinder stuff now. And what does it do? See, these are the problems with spells. You have to know all these if you're in my game. If you're in your game, you have to know all the ones that are in the player's handbook. How many of you have memorized every spell in the player's handbook? You'll shock me if you have. Some of you have. Most of you haven't. That's why it's important, and I'm doing this for a reason, because you need this. If your players have spells, you need their spell lists. Because you, before your game, should familiarize yourself with those spells, especially the ones they like to do a lot. Because otherwise what's going to happen is you're going to make mistakes. And then there's going to be arguments in your game. Now it's not an argument. I got 2 players that are spell players, but I always look anyways. When my players are going back and forth, well, it's doing this, that, the other, I'm looking. And I'm going, yep, confirmed, it does do that. It doesn't do that. Why? Because repetition for me is good. Okay? So that's the first thing. Number 1. Number 2, do you understand the feats and the skills and the class type of talents, feats, and other features that are in those classes? How well do you understand them? That's a good question. I have to understand my guy's things. Like, I've got a war priest that can channel into his weapon. He also has the ability, with one of the feats he took, to make the weapon a holy weapon, a disruption weapon, whatever type of weapon that his deities, and this is only on the one that his deity's weapon is. Okay? So keep in mind, you have to know these things. Why? Because your players are not always going to know them. Did you know that when you channel and hit an undead, they get a saving throw versus the channeling energy? Some of you knew, some of you didn't. That's why it's important. My guy didn't. He thought it's just damage, so he's rolling and giving me total damage. I'm like, whoa, Kal-El. Let's redo this. They get a saving throw. Oh, no, they don't. Oh, but they do. You would like them not to, but they do. So it's important. He's also got a thing that allows him to rage up and become harder to hit. There's an ability that every creature he kills, his armor class adds bonuses, sacred bonuses to it. Did you know that? Bet you didn't. Some of you know it, some of you don't. This is why becoming familiar with your players' class abilities is important. I'm going to have another campaign coming up where one of the guys is playing a kineticist. I'm going to have to sit down and make sure I am rock solid on kineticists. Because he's going to try to do things. He's going to do channeling the burn, and they use a thing called the burn. Where do you put the burn? That's fatigue to them, and damage hit point wise for every spell or every powering up of their kinetic abilities that they have. They can spend and do that, but you got to get familiar with that. That's my second thing to say, is learn from these things. And I'm giving you just some little insights, because you can adapt these to whatever system. Again, now, simpler systems, don't worry. Open Legend has a little more simplification. You can get things down a little simpler than Pathfinder. It's more complicated than D&D, but it's not as complicated as Pathfinder. Okay. Numenera, straightforward. Mutants and Masterminds, not always. Chaosium and Call of Cthulhu, not always. Chaosium has some interesting things. Savage Worlds, when it comes to the gunslingers and Deadlands Reloaded, there's some complicated things with cards and chips and other things you get that you gotta remember. And you as a GM have to remember how the cadence goes with these things. And how do they stack, and how do they work together, and how can they apply these, and when can they apply these, and when can't they? You know, it's important. Like, for instance, in Numenera, you can use XP points to boost things that happen to you or don't happen to you. That's a nice thing, if you know how to use it. See, these are the things that you got to remember. You got to get in and know these things. Running a combat. How do you keep things flowing with a large-scale combat? That is always a difficulty for any GM. For me, that's the same with my players, because I got one over here that likes to play on his phone. Love him to death, but he plays his game until it's his turn, because he gets bored. Got another over here who will check the scores. I almost told him a couple times, put the dang phone away. And I do tell them that sometimes. I've got others that'll go off and do their own thing. And then they'll come back and say, well, what was going on? Or what happened in this? My advice to you as a GM, don't tell them. Tough crunchies. You play it on your thing, doing your own thing. I'm not telling you what happened. But you've got to kind of keep a flow and a cadence. Otherwise, you lose interest in your players. And it's okay to have some side talk and banter. Some people say, well, cut out all the side talk till after the game. Nah, don't do that. I don't believe in that. And again, you guys can correct me otherwise, GMs and DMs who are more experienced. I'm not a believer in doing the cadence thing that, we're going to go from A to B to C, and we're going to work the session, and there's going to be nothing else in the session. Yeah. Tell me how that works for you long term. It doesn't. I've got a player who's like that, believe me, and he wants to move things along. You'll hear him going, moving along, and I want to say to him, dude, take a chill pill for a minute. I don't get to see you guys but once every 2 weeks. It's nice to catch up a little on the banter, too. So you got to gauge it. I mean, you can't take an hour and a half of banter, all right? That gets you nowhere. But 5 minutes, 10 minutes of banter now and then, okay, yeah, so you do. Little interruptions, they come. It's part of life. Okay to do, all right? So what other things do you have to think about when you're thinking about said things? Fourth thing I really think about is understanding the skills of, if you have skills. And most do. Most have skills, or as Numenera will call them, what are they? Not artifacts, but, God, I'm sorry, Monty and Shanna, I should remember this off the top. This is what happens. And see, this is the other thing as a GM and DM. When you buy multiple systems, they're great to read about, but you're going to screw them up and mess them up sometimes. It happens. Boy, I'll remember them. But you get to do little things, and you have to understand, what does that do for me? How do I use these things as a GM? Because your players are going to mess things up. So, for instance, if you have a player that wants to use knowledge, okay, and they want to figure out about undead, which knowledge is it? Pathfinder ones are jumping up right now going, oh, this one. How about using street smarts? That was a good one that came up in one of the deals. How do you use street smarts? Where does it apply? How could you use it? How about its athleticism? If you have a feat as athleticism, what does it do for you? How about stealth? How is stealth used? What are all the things you can use stealth for? Some people are going sneaking, moving silently, hiding in shadows. Yeah. But there's other things. You can combination things. So, for instance, if you're trying to hide a weapon you're going to stab somebody with and do it as a walk-by, what skills would you use? Are there combinations you could use? How would you present it to your GM? GM, how would you allow them to present it to you? You have to be quick on the sly of understanding these things. I think for me, the nuts and bolts mechanics of understanding a class is important, especially as your players are going to want to do complex things. You have to, that's what keep game, see, this is where people say, oh, Pathfinder's so hard, or this system's so hard, or it's more complicated, and there's more steps, and there's more mechanics. Not if you understand them. If you understand them, if your players understand them, if you can explain them to your players, it goes like this. How do you forge documents? What skills would you use to make forgeries? Okay. If you're trying to sell the forgery once you put it into their hands, what skills do you use together? How about pretending that you're an inspector coming in to inspect an area? And what skills would you use in combination to try to win over the people locally and change their opinion of you, since they don't know you from Adam, how are you going to do that? If you're trying to recall something you learned in a library one time as a character in your adventure, how would you do it? What skill combinations? GM, what skill combinations would you have them use? I'm giving you some things, and I'm not telling you the answers as you noticed. You know why? Because there's lots of combinations you can use. It's up to you as the GM to figure out what works best. And it's up to the players to be creative. Do you award them experience points for being creative with these skills? Do you have experience awards for doing a skilled forgery that gets them past a combat situation that normally you'd only award them combat? What CR do you use? What challenge rating? What XP? How do you award it? Or if you don't use XP, or if you use the 1 XP, half XP type of method, what do you reward the characters with? Do you have boons that you give them? They failed? Do you have banes? What are you using? See, for my characters, I like to reward them when they're especially thoughtful. Now, if it's something that I've seen them use before, I don't do a lot extra with it. But if it's something way outside the box in the realm of what I'm used to, I like it. And I'm going to reward them for it. Do you put up condition? Do you have condition cards? I have condition cards in my game, fortunately. D&Ders, here's what I would tell you. Buy the Pathfinder condition cards. Other game masters, buy the Pathfinder condition cards. Why is that? Unless your game has condition cards, you better have something to put down to remind you and the players when they have a condition or effect on them. So fatigue, dazed, confused, dazzled. What do you do to remind them of their penalties and what they can and can't do? Oh, you don't? You make little notes on your scratch paper? Harder to do, guys. Way harder. Unless you're using something like Fantasy Grounds or Roll20 that notes the conditions and highlights them out to the side and calculates that, and you know how to click those things on, it's a hard thing. I love throwing down the cards. Why is that? Because the cards have conditions on them. They say the condition, the duration, and what effect it has. Now, you can scribble and put note. Okay, so say you want to convert it from Pathfinder to Numenera. Use a sticky and put a little sticky on there and note what that condition will be and what it does. That way you don't ruin the card and mark the card. Put a sticky note on there and you flip it down. These are little things, but I'm just telling you, for game flow and for sake of sanity, it's stuff that I'm learning, okay? And I've been doing this 20-some-odd years. But I'm going to tell you now, these little things are going to be probably the more useful GM tips. I know you guys love my other ones. These are working ones that get you around a situation and make it easy. Like, for instance, and I've mentioned it several times, having your characters roll a perception roll, or whatever it is to detect things. Marking it on your if you use miniatures, put it on your erasable maps. Put their name, what it is. If they need stealth, have them do a stealth roll. If they need other things that are just up and going for them to help them, like a knowledge local or something, have them roll it ahead of time and put it out there. What have you just done? Now you as a GM can roll, and you're not having to alert them of what's going on. And just roll your dice from time to time so they don't know when you're really having an encounter situation or not. And then all of a sudden you've shocked them into reality. And there's a constant surprise factor going on. And you've already gotten their, what I call, non-concentrative type of abilities. And you take into account any devices they have. So if they got things that see invisibility, if they got things that are like warning alarms up, put that into that factor beside their character. And then when you roll, you can say, you can slip them a note, pull them aside, or you can tell the whole group, but you remind the group, guys, you guys don't know what's going on. You know, but you don't know. And so you help them to do that. All right, guys, that's my GM tips for this week. I hope you like it. It's just kind of thoughts of a GM on gameplay. So I hope it helps you, no matter the system. Hope you have some great gameplay this week, and I'm out.